The $50 billion deal was collapsing in real time. No translator. Chinese investors walking out. Then the janitor stepped forward and spoke perfect Mandarin. But what he told them about the CEO made everyone in that room go silent. Hi, my beautiful family. Thank you for sticking around with me through our trying times. I really appreciate your love and support. We're finally back again to give you many more beautiful stories. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. The conference room on the 42nd floor of Morrison Industries felt like a pressure cooker as CEO James Morrison paced behind his mahogany desk, sweat beading on his forehead despite the perfectly regulated air conditioning. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, downtown Chicago stretched out below him, but he barely noticed the view that usually made him feel like master of his domain. "Where the hell is our translator?" James snapped at his assistant, Sarah, who was frantically working her phone and laptop simultaneously. "Mr. Morrison, I'm sorry, but there's literally no one available. Every translator in the city is booked, and the agencies are saying it would take at least 2 hours to get someone here." James felt his world crashing down around him. Chan Industries was the biggest potential partnership his company had ever pursued. Leo Chan, the founder and CEO, was known for conducting all his business in Mandarin, with English-speaking partners only when absolutely necessary. It was his way of ensuring that American companies took his culture and language seriously. James had spent 6 months preparing for this meeting, learning basic Mandarin phrases and cultural protocols, but his language skills were elementary at best, nowhere near sufficient for complex business negotiations. "Maybe I could help," the janitor said softly. James turned on him with barely contained fury. "Help? How could you possibly help? This is a complex international business negotiation, not cleaning supplies." The older man didn't flinch at James's harsh tone. "My name is Charles Washington," he said with quiet dignity, "and I've been listening to you practice your Mandarin after hours for months." "You've been what?" James stared at him. "I work the night shift, Mr. Morrison. I've heard you in here late at night, trying to perfect your pronunciation, studying your flashcards." Charles's voice remained calm and respectful. "Your dedication to learning Mr. Chan's language has been impressive." "That still doesn't explain how you think you can help," James said, though something in the man's demeanor was making him pause. "Because I speak fluent Mandarin," Charles said simply. The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. James stared at the janitor, Charles, as if he just claimed to be able to fly. "That's impossible," James said flatly. He caught himself before saying something he couldn't take back. Charles finished gently. "Yes, I am. I've been cleaning offices in this building for 15 years, but I'm also a retired professor of East Asian Studies from Northwestern University." Sarah's jaw dropped. James felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. "That can't be true," James said. Charles reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a worn wallet. From it, he extracted a faded faculty ID card from Northwestern University. The photo showed a younger version of the same man wearing a suit and tie instead of a custodial uniform. "Professor Charles Washington, Department of East Asian Languages and Cultures," Charles said, handing James the ID. "I specialized in Sino-American business relations and served as a translator for the State Department for 12 years before entering academia." James examined the ID with growing shock. "If this is true, then why are you working as a janitor?" Charles smiled sadly. "Budget cuts eliminated my department when I was 62. Too old to be hired at other universities, too young to retire comfortably. I needed health insurance for my wife's medical treatments, and Morrison Industries offered good benefits to custodial staff." "Mr. Morrison," Sarah interrupted urgently, "the Chan delegation just pulled up downstairs." James looked at Charles, his mind racing. Everything he thought he knew about this man, about the people who worked in his building, was crumbling. "You're serious about this?" James asked. "You can actually handle a complex business negotiation in Mandarin? I've translated for Fortune 500 companies, government officials, and university partnerships. Business terminology, cultural nuances, diplomatic protocol, it's what I did for 30 years before I started emptying your trash cans." James felt heat creeping up his neck as he realized the implications of what Charles was saying. This man had been invisible to him for years, someone whose work he depended on, but whose humanity he'd never acknowledged. "Why would you help me?" James asked quietly. "I've never even bothered to learn your name." Charles was quiet for a moment, then said, "Because this partnership means jobs, Mr. Morrison. It means security for the people who work here, including the custodial staff. And because sometimes we help each other not because we deserve it, but because it's the right thing to do." The elevator chimed again, and this time it brought Lu Chen and his entourage, 5 impeccably dressed executives carrying leather briefcases and wearing expressions of polite expectation. James looked at Charles, seeing him truly for the first time. This wasn't just about the language barrier anymore. This was about the assumptions he'd made, the blindness he'd shown to the people around him, and the opportunity to learn something far more valuable than Mandarin. "Charles," he said, and the name felt strange but important on his tongue. "I would be honored if you would help us with this meeting." Charles nodded and began removing his custodial gloves. "Then let's make sure Morrison Industries and Chen Industries build something meaningful together." As the Chen delegation approached the conference room, James realized that his biggest challenge today wasn't going to be the language barrier. It was going to be confronting the kind of man he'd been and deciding what kind of man he wanted to become. "Charles," he said, and the name felt strange but important on his tongue. "I would be honored if you would help us with this meeting." Charles nodded and began removing his custodial gloves. "Then let's make sure Morrison Industries and Chen Industries build something meaningful together." As the Chen delegation approached the conference room, James realized that his biggest challenge today wasn't going to be the language barrier. It was going to be confronting the kind of man he'd been and deciding what kind of man he wanted to become. Have you ever realized that the help you needed most was right in front of you, hidden by your own assumptions? Sometimes the most important conversations happen when we finally learn to see the people who've been there all along. As Charles Washington transformed from janitor to translator, James Morrison found himself witnessing something that challenged everything he thought he knew about the people who worked in his building. Charles moved with quiet efficiency, washing his hands at the executive washroom sink, then removing his custodial uniform to reveal a crisp white dress shirt and dark slacks underneath. "I always keep a change of clothes in my locker," Charles explained, adjusting his tie with practiced precision. "You never know when life might require you to be someone different than who people expect you to be." James watched in fascination as Charles's entire demeanor shifted. Gone was the deferential custodian who had cleaned around him for years. In this place stood a man who carried himself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to academic halls and diplomatic circles. "Charles," James said hesitantly, "I have to ask, how did I never know about your background?" Charles paused in straightening his shirt and looked at James with patient eyes. "Mr. Morrison, in 15 years of working here, how many conversations have we had?" James felt heat creep up his neck as he realized the answer was 0. Not once had he bothered to speak to Charles beyond perfunctory nods or the occasional good morning when their paths crossed. "I see you every day," Charles continued gently, "but you've never seen me. To you, I was just the man who emptied your trash and vacuumed your office. My history, my education, my life, none of that mattered because of the uniform I wore." "That's not," James started, then stopped. Because it was true. He'd made assumptions based on Charles's job, his age, his race, and had never bothered to look deeper. "Tell me about your wife," James said quietly. "You mentioned her medical treatments." Charles's expression softened. Margaret, we've been married 43 years. She has rheumatoid arthritis and diabetes. The medications alone cost more than my professor's pension could cover, even with Medicare. The health insurance at Morrison Industries has been a blessing. James felt something twist in his chest. This man had been sacrificing his dignity, working in a job far below his qualifications to take care of the woman he loved. The university really just let you go? Budget cuts, Charles said with a philosophical shrug. Happens to a lot of older faculty. East Asian studies isn't considered essential in a tight economy. At 62, I was too expensive to keep and too young for full retirement benefits. But surely other universities would hire a 62-year-old black professor when they could get a 35-year-old for half the salary? Charles smiled sadly. Mr. Morrison, academia talks about diversity, but ageism is still very real, especially when it intersects with other factors. James was quiet, processing this reality he'd never considered. He'd built his success on the assumption that merit alone determined outcomes, that hard work guaranteed recognition. The idea that someone could lose everything through circumstances beyond their control challenged his entire worldview. How do you do it? James asked. How do you come to work every day knowing that you're overqualified, undervalued? Charles finished. Because work has dignity, Mr. Morrison. All honest work has dignity. And because my colleagues in the custodial department are good people who deserve respect regardless of their education level. Sarah knocked on the conference room door. Mr. Morrison, the Chin delegation is ready to begin. James looked at Charles, who had transformed completely. Standing straight, radiating calm confidence, he looked every inch the distinguished professor he had been. Are you ready for this? James asked. I've been ready for this kind of work my entire career, Charles said. The question is, are you ready to succeed? As they walked toward the conference room, James found himself seeing his office building with new eyes. How many other people had he overlooked? How many stories, talents, and experiences had he dismissed because of his assumptions? The Chen delegation rose respectfully as they entered. Lu Chen was a distinguished man in his 70s with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. His 4 colleagues ranged in age from their 30s to their 60s, all impeccably dressed and radiating the quiet confidence of successful business leaders. James stepped forward, preparing to attempt his elementary Mandarin greeting, but Charles smoothly intercepted. 柳先生，欢迎来到莫里森工业。我是华盛顿先生，今天为您担任翻译。这位是詹姆斯·莫里森先生，我们公司的 Chief 执行长。Liu Chen's eyes widened with surprise and unmistakable approval. He responded in rapid Mandarin, and James watched in amazement as Charles nodded and replied fluently.
Mr. Chen says he is honored to meet with Morrison Industries, Charles translated. He is impressed that you have engaged a translator who clearly understands not just the language, but the cultural nuances of business protocol. James felt a surge of gratitude toward Charles, followed immediately by shame at his own surprise. Had he really expected less from this man? 请告诉钱先生，我们非常尊重他的时间和专业知识, Charles said to Lu Chen, then turned to James. I've told him that we deeply respect his time and expertise. Lu Chen smiled and spoke again, gesturing toward Charles with obvious respect. He wants to know about my background, Charles translated. He says my accent suggests formal training. Tell him the truth, James said, making a decision that felt important. Tell him exactly who you are. Charles raised an eyebrow but complied, speaking at length in Mandarin. James watched Lu Chen's expression shift from interest to admiration to something that looked like delight. What did you tell him? James asked. That I'm a retired professor of East Asian studies, that I specialized in Sino-American business relations, and that I currently work in facilities management at Morrison Industries, Charles said. Lu Chen spoke again, and this time there was warmth in his voice. He says that a company that recognizes and utilizes all the talents of its employees, regardless of their current position, is a company that understands true value, Charles translated. He's more interested in doing business with us than he was 5 minutes ago. James felt something shift in his understanding. This wasn't just about language anymore. This was about respect, recognition, and the wisdom that came from seeing people as whole human beings rather than just their job titles. "Charles," James said quietly, "after this meeting, we need to talk about a lot of things." "Yes, sir," Charles said, but there was something different in his tone now. Not the deference of an employee to a boss, but the acknowledgement between two professionals working toward a common goal. As the meeting began in earnest, James found himself learning more than just business terms in Mandarin. He was learning what it meant to truly see the people around him, to recognize that brilliance could be found in unexpected places, and that sometimes the help you need most comes from the person you've been overlooking all along. Lu Chen was speaking passionately about his company's expansion plans, and Charles was translating with the skill of someone who understood not just words, but intentions, cultural contexts, and business implications. James realized that this meeting wouldn't just determine the future of a business deal. It would determine what kind of leader he chose to become, and what kind of company Morrison Industries could be when it recognized the full potential of everyone who worked there. The real negotiation, he understood now, wasn't with the Chinese delegation. It was with his own assumptions, prejudices, and blind spots. And for the first time in years, James Morrison was genuinely excited to see what he might learn about himself. The negotiations had been progressing smoothly for 2 hours when everything suddenly went sideways. Lu Chen had been outlining his company's manufacturing requirements, speaking in rapid Mandarin while Charles provided seamless translation. James felt confident, even proud of how well the meeting was proceeding. Then the conference room doors burst open. "James, what the hell is going on here?" Victoria Sterling, Morrison Industries vice president and James's biggest rival for board approval, strode into the room with 3 other senior executives in tow. Her sharp suit and sharper expression radiated the kind of corporate authority that had earned her a reputation as the Iron Lady of the company. James felt his stomach drop. Victoria had been conspicuously absent from the morning briefings, and now he understood why. She'd been planning this ambush. "Victoria, we're in the middle of crucial negotiations," James said, trying to keep his voice level while acutely aware of the Chen delegation watching this exchange with growing confusion. "Negotiations being conducted by a janitor?" Victoria's voice dripped with disbelief as she stared at Charles. "James, have you completely lost your mind?" Lu Chen spoke sharply in Mandarin, and Charles quickly responded before turning to the room. "Mr. Chen is asking if there's a problem with the translation services," Charles said diplomatically. "Tell him everything is fine," James said firmly, but Victoria wasn't finished. "Everything is not fine," she said, her voice rising. "I've just learned that you've entrusted a $200 million negotiation to a man who cleans toilets for a living." The room fell silent. James saw Charles's face remain impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, but a deep, familiar disappointment that spoke of a lifetime of such moments. Lu Chen said something else in Mandarin, his tone sharper now. Charles hesitated for the first time all morning. "What did he say?" James asked. "He's asking if the woman who just entered questions my qualifications to serve as translator." Charles laughed harshly. "Qualifications? What qualifications could he possibly have?" "More than you know," James said, his voice carrying a warning. "James, I've done my research," Victoria said, pulling out her phone. "Charles Washington, age 67, high school education, 15 years as a custodial worker. This is who you've chosen to represent Morrison Industries in the most important deal of the decade?" "Your research is incomplete," James said, but Victoria was already continuing. "The board is in emergency session," she announced. "When they hear about this stunt, about you gambling our company's future on some delusional—" "That's enough," James said sharply, but the damage was visible. The Chen delegation was exchanging glances, and Lu Chen's expression had grown cold. Charles stood slowly, his dignity intact despite the humiliation. "Mr. Morrison, perhaps it would be better if you found another translator." "No," James said firmly, "absolutely not."
Victoria smirked. James, be reasonable. We can still salvage this. I've arranged for Professor Lin from the University of Chicago to come in. She'll be here in 30 minutes. Lu Chen spoke again, and this time his tone was final. Charles translated, his voice heavy. Mr. Chen says that if Morrison Industries cannot show proper respect for its own employees, how can they expect to show proper respect for their business partners?
The words hit the room like a bomb. James saw everything he'd worked for hanging in the balance. Not just the deal, but his integrity, his understanding of what leadership really meant. "Wait," James said, stepping forward. "Victoria, you want to know Charles's qualifications? Let me tell you." He looked directly at Lu Chen as he spoke, with Charles translating in real time. Professor Charles Washington is a retired faculty member from Northwestern University, where he taught East Asian studies for 30 years. He has a PhD in international relations with a specialty in Sino-American business culture. He served as a translator for the U.S. State Department for 12 years, working on trade negotiations with China, Japan, and South Korea. Victoria's smug expression began to falter. He lost his position due to university budget cuts, not due to any failure on his part. He took a position in our custodial department because it offered the health insurance his wife needed for her medical treatments. For 15 years, he has worked the night shift, maintaining our offices while continuing to study current business practices and language evolution. James turned to face Victoria directly. So when you ask about his qualifications, the answer is that he's more qualified for this job than anyone else we could have found. The only question is whether we're qualified to deserve his help. Lu Chen had been listening to Charles's translation with growing interest. When it finished, he spoke at length, his tone warming considerably. "Mr. Chen says," Charles translated, a slight smile playing at his lips, "that a company wise enough to recognize talent regardless of where it's found, and a CEO brave enough to defend his people against criticism, is exactly the kind of partner he wants to work with." Victoria's face had gone pale. "James, you can't be serious about this." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," James said. "Charles, would you please tell Mr. Chen that Morrison Industries is honored to have employees of his caliber, and that we look forward to building a partnership based on mutual respect and recognition of worth?" As Charles translated, James saw Lu Chen's expression transform into something approaching delight. The old man spoke again, this time with evident warmth. "He says," Charles translated, his own voice thick with emotion, "that respect is the foundation of all good business, and that any company that understands this principle will prosper in China." Victoria's face had gone pale. "James, you can't be serious about this." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," James said. "Charles, would you please tell Mr. Chen that Morrison Industries is honored to have employees of his caliber, and that we look forward to building a partnership based on mutual respect and recognition of worth?" As Charles translated, James saw Lu Chen's expression transform into something approaching delight. The old man spoke again, this time with evident warmth. "He says," Charles translated, his own voice thick with emotion, "that respect is the foundation of all good business, and that any company that understands this principle will prosper in China." Victoria made one last desperate attempt. "The board will never approve this. When they hear that I've just secured the largest international partnership in company history," James interrupted, "I think they'll be very pleased." Lu Chen stood and approached Charles, speaking earnestly in Mandarin. Charles responded with obvious surprise and gratitude. "What was that about?" James asked. "He's invited me to visit Chen Industries headquarters in Shanghai as part of the ongoing partnership negotiations," Charles said, his voice barely steady. "He says that a man of my experience and cultural understanding would be invaluable for ensuring smooth communication between our companies." James felt a surge of emotion, pride, gratitude, and something deeper. The recognition that this moment had changed not just a business deal, but his understanding of what it meant to lead, to value people, to see beyond the surface to the truth underneath.
Victoria was gathering her papers, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This isn't over, James. The board will hear about this circus." "Yes, they will," James agreed. "They'll hear about how Morrison Industries succeeded because we recognized and valued the talents of all our employees. They'll hear about how we built a partnership based on respect rather than assumptions." As Victoria left, taking her entourage with her, James turned to Charles. "Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay," Charles said quietly. "For the first time in 15 years, I feel seen." Lu Chen spoke again, and Charles's translation made James's heart soar. "He says," Charles translated, his own voice thick with emotion, "that the partnership between Chen Industries and Morrison Industries begins now, and that he looks forward to working with a company that understands the true meaning of honor." But as they shook hands and began discussing the details of their new partnership, James realized that his biggest challenge was just beginning. Victoria's threat wasn't idle. The board would question his judgment, his methods, and his fitness to lead. The question was, would he have the courage to keep fighting for what was right, even when it cost him everything he thought he wanted? Looking at Charles, who was speaking with Lu Chen as equals, both men radiating the quiet dignity of true professionals, James knew the answer. Some things were worth fighting for, and recognizing the worth of every human being was at the top of that list. The celebration was short-lived. By the time the Chen delegation left Morrison Industries with signed preliminary agreements worth $200 million, James found himself facing a corporate uprising that made the morning's crisis seem simple by comparison. "Are you completely insane?" Board Chairman Robert Hartwell's voice crackled through the conference phone as James sat in his office, still riding the high of successful negotiations. "I put our most qualified translator in charge," James corrected, but he could already feel the ground shifting beneath him. "A janitor, James?" This from board member Patricia Wells, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Do you have any idea how this looks? What happens when the press finds out that Morrison Industries had to rely on custodial staff for international negotiations? It looks like we're a company that recognizes talent wherever we find it," James said, but his confidence was starting to waver under the barrage of criticism. "It looks like we're desperate and unprofessional," Hartwell snapped. "The other board members are already questioning your judgment. Some are calling for an emergency vote of no confidence." James felt his world tilt. "Robert, the deal went through. We've just secured the largest partnership in company history."
A deal that could be revoked the moment Chen Industries realizes they were negotiating with cleaning staff. This from board member David Chen, no relation to Lu Chen despite the name. This is a publicity nightmare waiting to happen. Charles Washington is a retired professor with 30 years of experience in exactly this field, James said, his voice rising. He was more qualified than any translator we could have hired. "Then why was he working as a janitor?" Patricia demanded. The question hung in the air, and James realized he was about to venture into territory that would make the board even more uncomfortable. Because academic institutions engage in age discrimination. Because a 62-year-old black professor couldn't find another position after budget cuts. Because sometimes good people fall through the cracks of systems that claim to value merit but actually value other things. The silence on the phone was deafening. "James," Hartwell's voice was carefully controlled, "you're starting to sound like you're making this about race." "Maybe because it is about race," James said, surprising himself with his boldness. "Maybe it's about age discrimination and economic inequality and all the ways we've been blind to the people right in front of us." "This is exactly what we were afraid of," Patricia said. "You're having some kind of crisis, James. This isn't like you." Wasn't it, James wondered, or was this exactly like him, the person he'd been before corporate success had taught him to value the wrong things? After the call ended with threats of emergency board meetings and votes of no confidence, James sat alone in his office, staring out at the Chicago skyline. A soft knock at his door interrupted his brooding. "Come in," he called, expecting Sarah with more crisis management tasks. Instead, Charles entered, now back in his custodial uniform but carrying himself with the same dignity he'd shown during the negotiations. "Mr. Morrison, I wanted to thank you for this morning," Charles said, "and to apologize for the trouble it's caused you." "You have nothing to apologize for," James said firmly. "If anything, I should be apologizing to you for 15 years of not seeing you, not knowing you, not recognizing what you brought to this company." Charles settled into the chair across from James' desk, the same chair he'd avoided for years, never presuming to sit in the executive space. "I've been thinking about what happened today," Charles said, "about Miss Sterling's reaction, about the board's concerns. Maybe it would be better if I step back, let this settle down." "Absolutely not," James said. "Charles, Lu Chen specifically requested that you be our liaison for the ongoing partnership. You're not stepping back from anything." "Mr. Morrison, James, I appreciate that, but I've seen this before. Good intentions, moments of recognition, but when the pressure builds, when it becomes about more than just doing the right thing." Charles's voice trailed off. "What do you mean?" Charles was quiet for a moment, then said, "When I was at Northwestern, I had a colleague, Dr. Sarah Kim, brilliant woman, Korean-American, expert in her field. She was up for tenure when the budget cuts started. The department said they had to make hard choices, that it wasn't personal. But it was personal? It's always personal when you're the one who doesn't fit the image they want to project. Sarah was too young, too ethnic, too willing to challenge established thinking. I was too old, too expensive, too much of a reminder that the university's diversity initiatives were just for show." James felt something cold settle in his stomach. What happened to her? "She's a professor at Seoul National University now, thriving, respected, valued for exactly the qualities that made her difficult here." Charles smiled sadly. "Sometimes the system forces out the very people who could make it better." "This isn't the same thing," James said. But even as he said it, he could hear the parallels. "Isn't it?" Charles asked gently. "You stood up for me today, and now they're questioning your leadership. How long before it becomes easier to just let me fade back into the background?" Before James could answer, Sarah knocked and entered with a grim expression. "Mr. Morrison, we have a problem. Victoria Sterling just called a press conference." "What?" James felt his blood pressure spike. "She's announcing that Morrison Industries has completed negotiations with Chen Industries, and she's taking credit as the architect of the deal." Sarah paused, her expression troubled. "She's also subtly suggesting that you had some kind of breakdown during the negotiations and that she had to step in to save the partnership." James stared at her. "She's stealing credit for the deal while simultaneously undermining my credibility." "It gets worse," Sarah said. "She's scheduled the press conference for the same time as the evening news cycle. By tomorrow morning, her version of events will be the official story." Charles stood up slowly. "Mr. Morrison, let me resign. Let me take a quiet retirement, and this all goes away. You keep your position, the deal stays intact, and everyone wins." "Except you," James said. "Accept the truth." "Sometimes the truth is a luxury we can't afford," Charles said quietly. James looked at this man who had spent 15 years accepting injustice with grace, who was now prepared to sacrifice himself again to protect James's career. The easy thing would be to let him do it. Let Charles fade back into invisibility. Let Victoria take credit for the deal. Let the system return to its comfortable inequality. But as James looked at Charles, really looked at him, seeing not just his current circumstances, but his full humanity, his contributions, his worth, he realized that some things were more important than career survival. "No," James said firmly, "I'm not letting you disappear again, and I'm not letting Victoria rewrite history." "James, be practical," Charles said. "You can't fight the entire corporate structure." "Maybe not," James agreed, "but I can try, and maybe that's enough."
Sarah cleared her throat. Mr. Morrison, there's something else. The Chen Industries delegation sent a message before leaving. They want to schedule a follow-up meeting next week to discuss implementation details. They specifically requested that Professor Washington be present for all future negotiations.
James felt a surge of vindication. Did you hear that, Charles? They see your value even if our own board doesn't. It doesn't matter what they see if you're not here to see it, Charles said. Then we'll make sure I'm here, James said, his resolve hardening. Sarah, schedule a press conference for 1 hour from now and get me everything we have on Morrison Industries employment practices, diversity initiatives, and talent recognition programs. Sir? Sarah looked confused. If Victoria wants to play the public relations game, let's play, James said, but let's play with the truth. Charles shook his head. James, you're risking everything for a principal. No, James said, standing up and extending his hand to Charles. I'm risking everything for a person, for the recognition that every human being deserves to be seen, valued, and respected for who they are, not just what position they hold. Charles looked at the extended hand for a moment, then shook it firmly. Then let's make sure we do this right. As Charles left to return to his custodial duties he would continue to perform with dignity regardless of the chaos swirling around him, James prepared for the fight of his professional life. He wasn't just fighting for his position as CEO anymore. He was fighting for the soul of his company, for the principle that worth wasn't determined by job titles or corporate hierarchies, and for the radical idea that seeing people as fully human was not just morally right, but good business. The board could fire him, Victoria could destroy his reputation, the press could paint him as unstable or naive, but he would not let Charles Washington disappear back into invisibility. Not again. Not ever. The war for Morrison Industries' future was about to begin, and James Morrison finally knew which side he was on. James was preparing for his press conference when Sarah burst into his office, her face flushed with excitement and disbelief. "Mr. Morrison, you need to see this," she said, practically vibrating with energy. "I was going through our international partnership files to prepare talking points for your press conference, and I found something incredible." "Sarah, I don't have time for. Morrison Industries has been successful in Asian markets for the past 15 years, Sarah interrupted, spreading documents across his desk. "Consistently, even when our competitors were failing, even when we had language barriers and cultural misunderstandings. I always wondered how we managed to avoid the mistakes that cost other companies millions." James looked at the files, contracts with Japanese firms, partnerships with Korean manufacturers, joint ventures with Taiwanese tech companies. All successful, all profitable, all somehow navigated without the cultural missteps that plagued their competitors. "What does this have to do with?" "Look at the dates," Sarah said. "Every single one of these deals was negotiated during Charles Washington's night shifts." James felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What are you saying?" "I talked to Jennifer Chan, our regular translator who was in the accident. She told me something interesting. She said that whenever she had difficult translations or cultural questions, she would leave notes for the night custodial staff to review the conference rooms for any forgotten materials. She said Charles would sometimes leave helpful notes about cultural context or better ways to phrase things in Mandarin." James stared at her. "Charles has been helping with our international business?" "For 15 years, Sarah confirmed, quietly, without credit, probably without even being asked, just helping." Before James could process this fully, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Liu Chen's number. "Mr. Morrison," Liu Chen's accented English was careful but clear. "I hope you don't mind that I'm calling directly." "Of course not, Mr. Chen. Is everything all right with our agreement?" "Everything is perfect, but I must tell you something important. Your translator today, Professor Washington, I knew him from before."
James felt his world tilt. You knew Charles? 20 years ago, I was a young businessman trying to establish my first American partnerships. I attended a conference at Northwestern University about Sino-American business relations. Professor Washington was the keynote speaker. His presentation about cultural respect and mutual understanding shaped how I approach all my international business relationships. James sank into his chair. Charles never mentioned this. Perhaps because he is a humble man, but his work, his scholarship, it influenced entire generation of Chinese business leaders. When I saw him today, I could not believe such honored professor was working as custodian. Mr. Chen, there were circumstances. I understand circumstances, Liu Chen said firmly, but I also understand waste of talent. Professor Washington's knowledge of Chinese business culture is extraordinary. His reputation in academic circles in China is still very strong. What are you saying? I am saying that Chen Industries would be honored to offer Professor Washington position as Director of Cultural Relations for our American operations. Salary of $200,000 per year, full benefits, and respect he deserves. James felt like the room was spinning. You're offering Charles a job? I am offering him return to the work he was meant to do, but only if he wishes, and only if Morrison Industries agrees to share his expertise through partnership. After hanging up, James sat in stunned silence. Charles, the man he'd overlooked for 15 years, had been quietly essential to the company's success, was respected internationally in academic circles, and had just been offered a position that would restore his professional standing. Sarah knocked again. Mr. Morrison, Victoria Sterling's press conference is starting. James turned on the wall-mounted television to see Victoria standing in front of Morrison Industries' logo, looking confident and polished. Morrison Industries is proud to announce our groundbreaking partnership with Chen Industries, Victoria was saying. This $200 million deal represents the future of international cooperation and demonstrates our company's commitment to excellence in global business relations. A reporter raised her hand. Ms. Sterling, we understand there were some unusual circumstances during the negotiations. Can you comment on reports that a custodian worker was involved in the translation?
Victoria's smile tightened slightly. There were some irregularities in our normal process due to an emergency. However, I want to be clear that all substantive negotiations were handled by qualified corporate personnel. But sources suggest that Mr. Morrison relied heavily on an employee named Charles Washington who works in facilities management. The reporter persisted. Mr. Washington is a valued member of our custodial team, Victoria said dismissively. While he may have provided some basic assistance, the real work of international negotiation requires sophisticated business acumen and cultural understanding that comes from proper corporate training. James felt anger building in his chest as he watched Victoria erase Charles's contributions while positioning herself as the deal's architect. Another reporter spoke up. Ms. Sterling, are you saying that Morrison Industries' international success has been due to your leadership? I've been instrumental in developing our Asian market strategy, Victoria said confidently. The Chen Industries partnership is really the culmination of years of careful relationship building and cultural education that I've spearheaded. James had heard enough. He picked up his phone and called the press conference directly. This is James Morrison, CEO of Morrison Industries, he said when they patched him through. I'm watching Miss Sterling's press conference and I need to correct some serious misstatements. The camera swiveled as reporters realized they had both executives on the line. Mr. Morrison, Victoria's voice was tight with surprise. I wasn't expecting... Victoria, you're taking credit for 15 years of work that you had nothing to do with, James said, and you're diminishing the contributions of a man who has been essential to our company's success. James, this is hardly the place. This is exactly the place, James interrupted, because the truth matters. Charles Washington isn't just our custodian. He's Professor Charles Washington, former Northwestern University faculty member, State Department translator, and the person who has been quietly ensuring our success in Asian markets for the past 15 years. The press room erupted with questions. Victoria's face had gone pale. Furthermore, James continued, I've just received a call from Li Chen himself, offering Charles a director-level position with Chen Industries because of his internationally recognized expertise in Sino-American business relations. That's impossible, Victoria said weakly. Is it? James asked. Or is it just that we've been so blind to the people around us that we can't recognize expertise when it doesn't come with the right title or background? A reporter called out, Mr. Morrison, are you saying that your custodial staff member is actually more qualified than your corporate executives? I'm saying that Charles Washington has been overlooked and undervalued because of assumptions about who deserves recognition, James said, and I'm saying that's about to change. Mr. Morrison, another reporter asked, what does this mean for your position at Morrison Industries? James took a deep breath. It means that I'm finally learning what real leadership looks like. And it means that Morrison Industries is about to become the kind of company that recognizes talent wherever it's found. As he hung up, James realized that everything had changed. The story was no longer about a CEO using a janitor as translator. It was about systemic inequality, hidden talent, and the courage to challenge assumptions about worth and value. Victoria's attempt to steal credit had backfired spectacularly. The press was now investigating the real story, how a respected professor had been reduced to custodial work, how his expertise had been ignored, and how a major corporation had benefited from his knowledge without recognition. But more than that, James understood that this wasn't just about Charles anymore. This was about every overlooked employee, every assumption based on appearances, every system that valued credentials over character and connections over competence. The revelation that Charles had been essential to their success all along wasn't just a vindication. It was a call to action. James picked up his phone and called Charles. We need to talk. About everything, about the past 15 years, about the future, and about making sure this never happens to anyone ever again. The real fight was just beginning. But for the first time, James knew they were fighting for something that truly mattered. The board meeting that would determine James's fate was scheduled for 8 a.m. But by 7:30, James already knew he was finished. Victoria Sterling sat at the head of the conference table with the confidence of someone who held all the cards, while the other board members avoided James's eyes as he entered the room. James, Chairman Robert Hartwell said without preamble, we need to discuss your very public breakdown yesterday. It wasn't a breakdown, James said, settling into his chair. Your truth has cost this company its reputation, board member Patricia Wells said sharply. The press is having a field day with this story. Morrison Industries is being portrayed as a company so dysfunctional that we rely on custodial staff for executive decisions. The press is reporting that we've been benefiting from an employee's expertise for 15 years without proper recognition. An employee who you've now made unemployable, Victoria said with false sympathy. James, your stunt yesterday didn't help Charles Washington. It destroyed his ability to work anywhere in this industry ever again. James felt ice in his veins. What are you talking about? Victoria slid a newspaper across the table. The headline read, Janitor Professor, Academic Fraud or Corporate Desperation. Read the article, Victoria said. Several sources are questioning whether Charles Washington actually has the credentials he claims. Northwestern University is being very careful about confirming his employment history, and the State Department isn't commenting on his translation work. James scanned the article, his heart sinking with each paragraph. Unnamed sources suggest that Charles might have exaggerated his qualifications. Academic colleagues who couldn't be reached for comment were cited as having concerns about his professional conduct. The article painted a picture of either a fantasist who had deceived Morrison Industries or a desperate CEO who had fabricated credentials to justify his poor judgment.
This is character assassination, James said. This is damage control, Victoria replied. James, you've put this company in an impossible position. Either we employed an unqualified translator for a crucial negotiation, or we've been harboring someone who misrepresented his credentials. Charles never misrepresented anything, James said firmly. Then explain this, Patricia said, sliding another document across the table. It was a personnel file showing Charles Washington's employment application from 15 years ago. Under education, it listed only a high school diploma. James stared at the document. This can't be right. It's his original application, Victoria said, signed and dated. Either Charles lied on his application 15 years ago, or he's been lying to you now. There has to be an explanation. The explanation, Hartwell interrupted, is that you've been duped by a convincing storyteller, and your emotional response to being deceived has damaged this company's credibility. What about Lu Chen's confirmation of Charles's academic reputation? James asked desperately. Mr. Chen has been unreachable since yesterday evening, Victoria said smoothly. And Chen Industries sent a message this morning expressing concern about the media coverage and requesting time to reassess the partnership in light of recent developments. James felt his world collapsing. They're backing out? They're concerned that Morrison Industries might not be the stable, professional organization they thought we were, Patricia said. And frankly, so are we. James, Hartwell said, his voice carrying finality, the board has lost confidence in your leadership. We're calling for your immediate resignation. You can't do this, James said, but he could hear the defeat in his own voice. Actually, we can, Victoria said, producing a thick folder. The board has reviewed your recent erratic behavior. The public confrontation, the media statements, the decision to base crucial business decisions on emotional impulses rather than sound judgment. And there's more, Patricia added grimly. Our legal department has discovered that by publicly discussing Charles Washington's employment and credentials, you may have violated privacy laws and exposed the company to significant liability. James's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and felt his heart break. Mr. Morrison, this is Margaret Washington. Charles is in the hospital. The stress of the past few days triggered a heart episode. I think you should know. I have to go, James said, standing abruptly. Sit down, James, Hartwell commanded. We're not finished. Yes, we are, James said, heading for the door. Do whatever you want with the company. Right now, a good man is in the hospital because I failed to protect him from this circus. James, Victoria called after him. If you leave this room, your resignation is effective immediately. James paused at the door, his hand on the handle. Behind him lay everything he'd worked for. His position, his salary, his professional identity. Ahead lay uncertainty, potential financial ruin, and the responsibility of caring for a man whose life he'd inadvertently made more difficult. Then I resign, he said quietly, and walked out. The hospital was a maze of sterile corridors and antiseptic smells that reminded James of his own mortality. He found Margaret Washington in the cardiac wing waiting room, her face etched with worry and exhaustion. Mrs. Washington, he said, approaching her carefully. How is he? Margaret looked up at him with eyes that held no anger, only sadness. He's stable. The doctors say it was brought on by stress and exhaustion. I'm so sorry, James said, the words feeling completely inadequate. This is all my fault. Is it? Margaret asked quietly. Or is it the fault of a system that forces good people to choose between dignity and survival? I should have handled this differently. I should have protected him better. Margaret was quiet for a moment, then said, Charles told me what you did yesterday. How you stood up for him, defended his worth, risked everything to make sure he was seen as a human being. And look where it got him, James said bitterly.
in the hospital, with his reputation destroyed and his job in jeopardy. Mr. Morrison, Margaret said gently, yesterday was the first time in 15 years that my husband came home feeling truly valued. He said it was worth whatever consequences came from it. Even this, she confirmed, because at least now he knows that one person saw him for who he really is. James's phone rang. Sarah's voice was panicked. Mr. Morrison, you need to know. Victoria Sterling has been named interim CEO. She's calling an emergency staff meeting to discuss restructuring in light of recent developments. What kind of restructuring? James asked, though he already knew. She's talking about eliminating positions that aren't cost-effective. The entire custodial department is being outsourced to a contractor. Charles Washington's employment is being terminated effective immediately. James closed his eyes. Not only had he failed to protect Charles, he'd made things infinitely worse. Charles is in the hospital, his job is gone, his reputation is in ruins, and the partnership with Chin Industries is falling apart. There's something else, Sarah continued. The new contractor Victoria's hiring, they've made it clear they won't be employing anyone over 65. Charles wouldn't qualify even if he was healthy. James looked at Margaret, this woman who had stood by her husband through decades of struggles and felt the weight of his failure crushing down on him. Mrs. Washington, he said quietly, I tried to do the right thing, and I made everything worse. Margaret studied his face for a long moment, then surprised him by taking his hand. Mr. Morrison, she said, doing the right thing doesn't guarantee good outcomes. Sometimes it guarantees the opposite, but that doesn't make it any less right. I've lost everything, James said. My job, my company, my ability to help Charles or anyone else. Have you? Margaret asked. Or have you finally found out who you really are? As James sat in the hospital waiting room, his career in ruins and his attempt to help Charles having backfired catastrophically, he wondered if Margaret was right. Had he found out who he really was? And if so, was that person strong enough to keep fighting when everything seemed hopeless?
Outside the hospital windows, Chicago went about its business, oblivious to the small human drama playing out in the cardiac ward. But for James Morrison, the world had narrowed to this: a good man lying in a hospital bed, a system that seemed designed to crush anyone who challenged it, and the growing understanding that sometimes the most important battles were the ones you fought when you had nothing left to lose. The question was, what did you fight with when everything else was gone? 3 days later, James sat beside Charles's hospital bed, watching his friend, because that's what Charles had become, a friend, slowly regain his strength. The heart episode had been serious but not life-threatening, and Charles's spirit seemed remarkably unbroken despite everything that had happened. You know, Charles said, his voice still weak but carrying a hint of his familiar humor, I've been thinking about what you said in that press conference, about recognizing talent wherever it's found. Charles, I'm so sorry, James said for what felt like the 100th time. I thought I was helping, but I made everything worse. Did you? Charles asked, adjusting his position in the hospital bed. James, yesterday I had visits from 12 people I haven't seen in years. Colleagues from Northwestern, former students, people from the State Department. They all heard the story and wanted to know if I was okay. James looked up, surprised. What did they say? They were angry, Charles said with a slight smile. Angry that I'd been working as a janitor. Angry that the university had let me go. Angry that nobody knew what had happened to me. Dr. Jennifer Kim, remember I told you about my colleague who went to Seoul? She's flying back from Korea just to see me. That's wonderful, but it doesn't change what I've cost you. Doesn't it? Charles pulled out his phone, which was filled with missed calls and text messages. I've received 3 job offers in the past 2 days. Real jobs, using my actual qualifications. Not because of sympathy, but because people finally know I'm available. James stared at him. I don't understand. James, for 15 years, I've been invisible in my field. When I was forced to retire, I just disappeared.
People assumed I was enjoying retirement, traveling, maybe writing a book. Nobody knew I needed to work, that I was still available, that I was still sharp and capable. But your reputation, the media coverage, has been clarified by people who actually know my work, Charles interrupted. Dr. Lisa Park from Northwestern released a statement yesterday defending my credentials and academic record. The State Department confirmed my translation work. The media narrative is already shifting. Before James could respond, a soft knock came at the door. Sarah peeked in, looking nervous but excited. "Mr. Morrison, I hope you don't mind, but there are some people here who wanted to see you both." "Who?" James asked. Sarah stepped aside, and to James's amazement, Lu Chen entered the room, followed by his interpreter and a woman James didn't recognize. "Professor Washington," Lu Chen said in English, approaching the bed with obvious concern. "I came as soon as I heard you were ill." "Mr. Chen," Charles said, struggling to sit up straighter, "I'm honored by your visit, but I must apologize for the confusion about our partnership." "No apology necessary, but much explanation needed." He turned to James. "Mr. Morrison, I believe you have been deceived by people in your own company." "What do you mean?" asked. The woman with Lu Chen stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Amanda Lu, Mr. Chen's daughter and Chen Industries legal counsel. We've been investigating the media coverage of our partnership, and we've discovered some disturbing information." She pulled out a tablet and showed them a series of documents. The negative stories about Professor Washington didn't come from legitimate journalism. They were planted by a public relations firm hired by Morrison Industries, specifically by Victoria Sterling. James felt his blood run cold. Victoria orchestrated the character assassination? "The firm has a specialization in reputation management," Dr. Lu continued. "They create false narratives to discredit individuals who threaten their clients' interests. Miss Sterling hired them the day after your press conference." "She destroyed Charles's reputation on purpose," James said, rage building in his chest. "She also lied about our company's position," Lu Chen added. "Chen Industries never expressed concerns about the partnership. In fact, we have been trying to reach you for 3 days to finalize our agreements." Charles was listening with growing amazement. "You still want to work with Morrison Industries?" "We want to work with you," Lu Chen corrected, "but not through Morrison Industries. Not while it is controlled by people who would destroy a good man's reputation for personal gain." "Then what are you proposing?" James asked. "We are proposing that you and Professor Washington start your own consulting firm," Dr. Lu said. "Chen Industries will be your first client, with a 3-year contract worth $5 million for cultural consulting and translation services." The room fell silent. James looked at Charles, who appeared to be processing this offer with the same shock James felt. "Are you serious?" James asked. "Completely serious," Lu Chen said. "Professor Washington's expertise is exactly what we need for our American expansion. And, Mr. Morrison, your willingness to stand up for your principles, even at great personal cost, tells us you are the kind of partner we want." Before James could respond, Sarah appeared in the doorway again, this time with a group of people James didn't immediately recognize. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but these folks insisted on seeing you both." "Who?" James asked. An elderly Hispanic woman stepped forward. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Rosa Martinez. I've worked in the Morrison Industries cafeteria for 22 years. "And I'm David Kim," said an Asian man in his 50s, maintenance supervisor, 18 years. "I'm Jennifer Thompson," added a black woman in her 40s, IT support, 12 years. James looked at the group of diverse faces, all Morrison Industries employees he was ashamed to realize he'd never really noticed. "We saw what you did," Rosa said, "how you stood up for Professor Washington, how you risked everything to make sure he was treated with respect."
"And we saw what they did to you both in return," David added. "We've been talking, and we have some things to say." Jennifer stepped forward. "Mr. Morrison, did you know that David has a master's degree in engineering? He's been improving our building systems for years, saving the company hundreds of thousands of dollars, but he's never been considered for a promotion to the engineering department. Rosa has been developing more efficient food service protocols that could be implemented company-wide, David continued, but nobody in management has ever asked for her input. And I've been quietly fixing cybersecurity vulnerabilities that the IT department couldn't solve, Jennifer said. But I'm classified as support staff, so my contributions don't count toward advancement. James felt a familiar pattern emerging. Talented people overlooked because of assumptions about their roles, their backgrounds, their worth. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because we want to come with you," Rosa said simply. "Whatever you and Professor Washington are planning, we want to be part of it." "You don't even know what we're planning," James said. "We don't know what we're planning. We know it will be better than working for people who see us as disposable. We know it will be run by someone who values people for who they are, not just what title they hold." Charles was smiling now, the first genuine smile James had seen from him since the hospital admission. "James, I think we have the start of something special here." "But I don't have any money," James said. "No office, no resources, no business plan." "You have something better," Leo Chan said. "You have integrity, talented people who trust you, and a client willing to support your vision." Margaret Washington, who had been quietly listening from her chair by the window, finally spoke up. "Charles, what do you think?" Charles looked around the room, at Leo Chen and his daughter, at the Morrison Industries employees who had come to offer their support, at James, who had risked everything to defend his dignity. "I think," Charles said slowly, "that it's time to build something new. Something that recognizes talent wherever it's found, that values people for their contributions rather than their credentials, that proves doing the right thing can also be good business." James felt something he hadn't experienced in days: hope, real, tangible hope for a future that could be better than the past. "Then let's do it," he said. "Let's build something worthy of all of you." As the group began to discuss possibilities, plans, and dreams, James realized that losing everything at Morrison Industries hadn't been the end of his story. It had been the beginning of something much more important. They were about to prove that the best way to change a broken system wasn't to fight it from within, but to build something better from the ground up. And this time, they would make sure that everyone who contributed would be seen, valued, and respected for exactly who they were. 6 months later, James stood in the bright, open office space of Washington Morrison Consulting, watching Rosa Martinez present her revolutionary food service efficiency model to a room full of corporate executives from 3 Fortune 500 companies. The woman who had once been dismissed as just cafeteria staff was now commanding the respect of CEOs as she explained how her innovations could save their companies millions while improving employee satisfaction. "The key insight," Rosa was saying in fluent English and Spanish, "is that efficiency without humanity is ultimately inefficient. When you treat workers as whole people with valuable perspectives, they contribute ideas that transform entire operations." James smiled as he watched the executives scribbling notes and asking detailed questions. This was their 14th major client presentation this quarter, and their success rate was unprecedented in the consulting industry. "Not bad for a bunch of misfits," David Kim said quietly, joining James at the back of the room. The former maintenance supervisor was now their director of operational innovation, and his engineering expertise had already revolutionized how 3 major companies approached facility management. "We're hardly misfits anymore," James replied, gesturing around the bustling office. "We're exactly what we were meant to be." Washington Morrison Consulting had grown from 5 people in a rented conference room to a team of 35 specialists, each one recruited not from traditional corporate backgrounds, but from the ranks of overlooked talent in companies across Chicago. They had maintenance workers with engineering degrees, administrative assistants with MBA-level insights, and security guards with expertise in logistics optimization.
And at the center of it all was Charles Washington, whose reputation in international business had been fully restored and enhanced by their spectacular success. "James," Sarah called from the reception area, "you have visitors." James turned to see Leo Chen approaching with his daughter Dr. Amanda Liu and a man James didn't recognize, a distinguished Asian gentleman in an expensive suit who carried himself with obvious authority. "Mr. Chen," James said warmly, "what brings you to Chicago?" "I wanted you to meet someone," Leo Chen said with a smile that suggested good news. "This is Dr. Michael Park, President of International Business Development for Park Industries." James recognized the name. Park Industries was one of the largest conglomerates in South Korea, with global operations that dwarfed even Chen Industries. "Mr. Morrison," Dr. Park said with a slight bow, "Mr. Chen has been telling me about your unique approach to business consulting. I confess I was skeptical until I reviewed your results." "Our results speak for themselves," James said modestly. "Indeed they do," Dr. Park agreed. "In 6 months, you've helped Chen Industries increase their American market penetration by 340%, reduced operational costs by 27%, and achieved employee satisfaction ratings that are the highest in their industry, all while maintaining perfect cultural sensitivity in international relations. We have an exceptional team," James said. "Led by Professor Washington, whose reputation in Asia has reached legendary status," Dr. Park continued, "which is why Park Industries would like to retain Washington Morrison as our exclusive North American consulting partner. We're prepared to offer a 5-year contract worth $50 million.
James felt his breath catch. Behind Dr. Park, he could see Charles emerging from his office, having finished a video conference with business leaders in Shanghai. "50 million?" James repeated. "With annual renewals based on performance," Dr. Park confirmed. "Your model of recognizing and utilizing overlooked talent has created the most innovative business solutions we've seen in decades." Charles joined the group, his face bright with curiosity. "Gentlemen, I hope everything is proceeding well." "Professor Washington," Dr. Park said with obvious respect, "Park Industries would be honored to work with you and your team." As Dr. Park outlined the partnership details, James's phone buzzed with an urgent message from a number he recognized but hadn't heard from in months. Victoria Sterling. "James, we need to talk. Urgent. Morrison Industries is in crisis. The board wants to discuss bringing you back as CEO." James showed the message to Charles, who raised an eyebrow. "Interesting timing," Charles observed quietly. "Should we take the meeting?" James asked. "I think we should," Charles said with a knowing smile. "After all, it's always polite to listen." 2 hours later, James and Charles sat in the Morrison Industries boardroom, the same room where James had been forced to resign 6 months earlier. The atmosphere was dramatically different now. Chairman Robert Hartwell looked haggard, the other board members appeared defeated, and Victoria Sterling was nowhere to be seen. "James," Hartwell began without preamble, "we made a mistake, a terrible, costly mistake." "Where's Victoria?" James asked. "Gone," Patricia Wells said grimly. "Fired for cause 3 weeks ago when we discovered the extent of her misconduct." "What kind of misconduct?" "The character assassination campaign against Charles was just the beginning," Hartwell explained. "We found evidence that she'd been systematically undermining other employees who threatened her position, embezzling funds through fake consulting contracts, and deliberately sabotaging business relationships to make herself look better." "The Chen Industries partnership?" James asked. "Collapsed completely after you left," Patricia said. "Chen Industries terminated all agreements when they learned about Victoria's smear campaign. They said they couldn't trust a company that would destroy its own employees. And it gets worse," Hartwell continued. "After your departure, we lost 12 major clients who said they no longer felt comfortable with Morrison Industries' values. Employee morale plummeted, productivity dropped 30%, and our stock price has fallen by 60%. James felt no satisfaction in their misfortune, only sadness that it had taken such consequences for them to understand what really mattered. Meanwhile, Patricia said with obvious admiration, "We've been watching Washington Morrison Consulting become the most respected firm in the industry. Your client roster reads like a who's who of international business." "What do you want from us?" Charles asked gently. "We want to hire Washington Morrison as our exclusive consulting partner," Hartwell said. "We want you to help us rebuild our culture, restore our reputation, and learn how to value our employees properly. And," Patricia added quietly, "we want to offer James his CEO position back, with Charles as Chief Cultural Officer and full board voting rights." James looked at Charles, seeing his own thoughts reflected in his friend's eyes. "That's very generous," James said, "but we have to decline." The board members looked stunned. "James," Hartwell said desperately, "we're offering you everything back, plus more authority and compensation than you ever had." "And we're grateful," Charles said, "but we've learned something important over the past 6 months." "What's that?" Patricia asked. "That you can't fix a broken system from within," James said. "You have to build something better from the ground up. Besides," Charles added with a smile, "we've just accepted a $50 million partnership with Park Industries. We're going to be rather busy." The silence in the room was deafening. James could see the realization dawning on their faces. The people they discarded had not only survived but thrived beyond their wildest imagination. "However," James continued, "we would be willing to consider Morrison Industries as a client. We have a standard consulting package for organizations seeking cultural transformation." "What would that involve?" Hartwell asked weakly. "A complete audit of your hiring practices, compensation structures, and promotion policies," Charles said. "Interviews with every employee to identify overlooked talents and unrecognized contributions. Implementation of systems that reward merit regardless of traditional credentials. And," James added, "a public apology to every employee who has been undervalued, overlooked, or dismissed because they didn't fit someone's narrow definition of corporate potential." As they left Morrison Industries for what James suspected was the final time, Charles chuckled softly. "You know what the best part is?" he said. "What's that?" 6 months ago, they saw us as a janitor and a failed CEO. Today, they're begging us to save their company. "And what does that tell you?" James asked. "That worth was never about the titles we held or the perceptions others had of us," Charles said. "It was always about the value we created and the dignity we maintained while creating it." 2 years later, James Morrison stood before an audience of 500 business leaders at the International Conference on Workplace Innovation in Geneva. But his attention kept drifting to the back of the room, where Charles Washington sat with Margaret, both of them beaming with pride. The traditional model of corporate hierarchy assumes that talent flows in predictable patterns, James said into the microphone. But what we've learned at Washington Morrison Consulting is that brilliance doesn't respect organizational charts. Innovation doesn't follow educational credentials. And the most transformative insights often come from the people we've trained ourselves not to see. The audience, CEOs, university presidents, government ministers, listened with the kind of attention usually reserved for revelatory discoveries, which James supposed this was. 2 years ago, our chief innovation officer was fixing broken air conditioning units while holding a master's degree in engineering. Our director of efficiency solutions was serving lunch while developing operational theories that have since revolutionized 3 Fortune 500 companies. Our senior cultural liaison was emptying trash cans while possessing expertise that has facilitated over $2 billion in international partnerships. He gestured toward the back of the room. And our chairman and co-founder was working the night shift in custodial services while being one of the most respected experts in Sino-American business relations. The applause was thunderous. Charles stood briefly, acknowledging the recognition with the same quiet dignity he'd shown throughout their journey. "The question isn't why these individuals were overlooked," James continued. "The question is, how many more are we still overlooking? How many brilliant minds are we wasting because they don't fit our narrow definitions of where talent is supposed to come from?" After his presentation, James joined Charles and Margaret at a quiet cafe overlooking Lake Geneva. Charles looked healthier than he had in years. The stress of hiding his abilities had lifted, replaced by the vitality that came from doing work that mattered. "You know," Charles said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully, "when I was young, I dreamed of changing the world through scholarship and diplomacy. I never imagined I'd end up changing it through custodial work." You didn't change the world through custodial work, Margaret said with a smile. You changed it by being yourself, consistently and with dignity, no matter what job you held. Speaking of being yourself, James said, pulling out his phone, I have some news that I think you'll appreciate. He showed them a news article with the headline, Morrison Industries files for bankruptcy protection following exodus of top talent. They never recovered? Charles asked, though he didn't sound surprised. 3 more senior executives left to start their own consulting firms, James explained. Apparently, our success inspired a lot of people to reconsider what they really valued in their careers. Morrison Industries became known as the company that drove away its best assets out of pride and prejudice. I almost feel sorry for them, Margaret said. I do feel sorry for them, Charles said, but not sorry enough to regret the path we chose. James's phone buzzed with a message from Rosa Martinez, who was currently in Sao Paulo helping a Brazilian manufacturing company implement her efficiency protocols. The message was simple. Presented to the Minister of Labor today, she wants to make our approach a national model for workplace equity. Rosa. Charles smiled as James shared the message. Remember when you were worried about one translation job? Now I'm worried about translating our model to dozens of countries, James laughed. Washington Morrison has offices opening in 5 new cities this year, and we've been invited to consult with the European Union on workplace diversity initiatives. And you're handling the expansion well? Margaret asked with motherly concern. We're being very careful about growth, James assured her. We interview every potential team member personally, not to check their credentials, but to understand their story, their values, their vision for what work could be. Charles nodded approvingly. Quality over quantity, dignity over profit margins. Although, James added with a grin, the profit margins aren't bad either. When you create environments where people can contribute their best work, productivity tends to follow. As they walked along the lake after lunch, Charles shared something that had been on his mind. James, I've been thinking about legacy, about what we leave behind when we're gone. What kind of legacy? James asked. I used to think legacy was about the papers you published, the theories you developed, the formal recognition you received. But now I think it's simpler than that. What do you mean? Legacy is about how many people felt seen and valued because they crossed paths with you. It's about David Kim getting to use his engineering expertise after 18 years of hiding it. It's about Rosa Martinez presenting to government ministers instead of being ignored in a cafeteria. It's about Jennifer Thompson leading cybersecurity initiatives instead of being classified as support staff. Charles paused by the water's edge, watching swans glide across the lake's surface. It's about you learning that leadership isn't about commanding from the top of a hierarchy, but about creating spaces where everyone can rise to their potential. James felt a familiar tightness in his throat. Charles, I need you to know something. Working with you, learning from you, building this company together, it's been the greatest honor of my professional life. The honor has been mutual, Charles said. You risked everything to see me as a whole person. That gift changed not just my life, Margaret's life, and the lives of everyone we've been able to help since then. Margaret took both their hands. You know what I love most about your story? What's that? James asked. It's not really about business or success or even justice, she said. It's about the moment when one human being truly sees another human being and refuses to look away. Everything else, the company, the recognition, the financial success, that all followed from that one moment of human dignity. As they flew back to Chicago the next day, James reflected on how much had changed since that morning when he'd panicked about finding a translator. He thought the crisis was about language barriers and business deals. But the real crisis had been about seeing barriers, the assumptions and prejudices that prevented him from recognizing the extraordinary person who had been right in front of him for 15 years. Washington Morrison Consulting now employed 127 people across 8 cities, had been featured on the cover of Harvard Business Review, and had consulting contracts worth over $200 million. But more importantly, it had become a model for how businesses could operate when they valued human potential over traditional credentials.
Charles had been invited to deliver the commencement address at Northwestern University, a healing moment that had brought tears to his eyes and national attention to the issue of age discrimination in academia. 3 other universities had since created emeritus consulting programs, ensuring that retiring faculty could continue contributing their expertise. The ripple effects continued expanding. Janitors were being promoted to facility management positions based on their innovations. Food service workers were being recruited to operations consulting roles. Security guards were being recognized for their insights into organizational efficiency. But perhaps the most meaningful change was personal. James had learned that true success wasn't measured in stock prices or corporate titles, but in the number of people who felt valued, seen, and empowered to contribute their best selves. As their plane descended into Chicago, James looked out at the city where his transformation had begun. Somewhere down there, in office buildings and hospitals, were people whose talents were being overlooked, whose contributions were being minimized, whose humanity was being reduced to job descriptions. "Ready to get back to work?" Charles asked, following his gaze. "Always," James said. "There's still so much to do." "Indeed there is," Charles agreed. "But look how much we've already accomplished, simply by choosing to see each other clearly." James smiled, thinking about the journey that had brought them here, from a panicked CEO and an overlooked janitor to partners and proving that respect, dignity, and human recognition weren't just moral imperatives, but practical necessities for building something extraordinary. The language of respect, it turned out, was the most valuable translation skill of all. And it was a language that everyone could learn to speak fluently if they simply had the courage to begin. In the end, changing the world hadn't required grand gestures or revolutionary technologies. It only required seeing the person standing right in front of you and refusing to accept their worth was determined by anything other than their humanity. That lesson James knew would outlast any company, outlive any career, and continue inspiring others long after he and Charles were gone. Because the most powerful truth they discovered was also the simplest. When you treat people with dignity and recognize their full potential, extraordinary things become not just possible, but inevitable. And in a world that too often forgot to see its own people clearly, that was a translation worth making. How many brilliant minds are you overlooking because they don't fit your expectations of where talent is supposed to come from? Sometimes the most important person in your life is someone you see every day but have never truly seen. If you watched this story all the way through, thank you. If it resonated with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I've got another story just as crazy you won't want to miss. And remember, thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now.